Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all around the world. I am so excited to be here today on this first day of our Gender Data Gap and the Startup Ecosystem Summit. Today, we are going to be exploring the gender data gap from a very subtle level and how to influence startups when they're at their most formative time, which is at the very beginning, that early stage. You see, if we try to affect change from the corporate level, as we've seen, it really has to be monetized. If we try to affect change from the government level, by the time anything really happens or takes hold, it's so slow, and sometimes it even gets voted out. We've seen what happens if we band together as women and stand strong. It doesn't always end the way we want. So what we're going to be doing today, and throughout the panel's 14 different perspectives, is we're going to begin to explore the gender data gap and how we can influence it at the very ground level. Today, we're going to be starting off with age diversity. You do not have to be a certain age to fit a specific mold to be a founder. You do not have to be a specific age, a specific mold to fit an investor level. So we have a wonderful group of founders today and investors and mentors and a little bit of everything. I'm going to start by introducing Elizabeth Layette, who is with Hold Exchange. We have Teresa here, who's actually with me at Linking Ventures, but a mentor that I've known for quite some time. Elizabeth and I actually met at the Autodesk phase way back as well. And we have two other founders that will be joining us. Technology is wonderful, isn't it? So they'll be joining us a little bit late. And what we're going to be doing today is just very much of a fireside chat. So I'm going to start off with Elizabeth. If you can just give us a quick introduction, a little bit just about who you are, and then we're going to go into a little bit more in depth.
Thank you, Cindy. Pleasure to be here this morning. Such a deep question. Who am I? I spent a weekend in like this Buddhist retreat trying to answer the question, who am I? And still haven't quite figured it out. But today I spend, I'm going to say about 150% of my time. I'm a managing partner at a venture fund. We are focused on early stage fintechs. I have 35 portfolio companies in early stage fintech. So we range from early seed, Series A, and we have some in Series B. So very exciting journeys. We're very focused on diversity. And I think that also comes inherently because we invest in companies from around the world. And I think that also lends to having a very different group, but we do focus looking for diverse teams, which is a priority for us. We certainly understand the benefits of that. And I think that I love always these opportunities to talk about how gender plays a role in technology, how it plays a role in our society today, and how we are becoming more and more aware of what that impact is over the longer term.
And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about every conversation that we have, is that there is that gender-informed component to everything that you do around Hold Exchange, around even all aspects of the ecosystem that you touch, which are a lot. Teresa, can you tell us a little bit about you? And I put you on this morning.
Oh, my favorite topic of not talking about myself. Oh, where do I begin on this journey and coming into meeting you in the ecosystem? I started my career as very typical in the corporate, working as a developer, and morphed into managing teams and projects. And along the way, I got into the wonderful meetup scene, and again morphed into becoming a mentor. Attending hackathons and different events and becoming a judge. And I love being that plus one that is a tipping point and making something happen. I think in the end of the day, that's my passion and my purpose. And that's why I love working with you and on these different projects to make those things happen. So in a nutshell, the ecosystem development, the business development, and making those companies flourish is my purpose.
And I think that that's the biggest thing about what we're trying to accomplish through this series of panels is that support to be able to encourage, empower, embody even that gender informed. And I'll tell you why that's so important right now is because only 3% of female founders are actually getting funded right now, and I always use this as a bit of analogy because we're trying to create aha moments and then follow them up by actionable change. And one of those moments that I like to share is I was trained in first aid. I've been trained Canadian Ski Patrol for the last 25 years. And we teach the universal signs and symptoms of a heart attack being the crushing sensation in the chest, the radiation of pain up and down the left arm. These universal signs and symptoms do not apply to majority of women. So when we talk about universal often doesn't include women. Our actionable change then is we have an amazing founder that will be on our Femtech panel on Friday, and she has developed a cardio platform specifically for women of color because race also plays an important part. So let's move into our questions. We have, I want to know from you, Elizabeth, what's the real reason you started on your entrepreneurial journey? I know we first met at Autodesk, and you were in a very different aspect there. But Autodesk life kind of brings out the creative juices. What's the real reason that you joined the entrepreneurial path? Oh, you're on mute.
Quote of 2021 is now same quote of 2022. You're on mute. I'm actually going to make a comment on when you talk about 3% of women founders getting funded. I was really surprised to hear a stat that it actually dropped down during COVID. I actually thought that digital was going to be a greater equalizer, but I was surprised to hear that. I think from my perspective, I've always kind of worked in a male-dominated environment, and I think that kind of pushed me to make bigger risks. I still look and say what got me I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation. I was recruited at a university, and it was very competitive to get in. And I remember I actually worked as a hockey referee. I had a boyfriend who was a hockey referee, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to sit in the stands and watch him. So I became one of the first women hockey referees in Quebec, and they'd asked me to describe stress. And I said, you know what stress is? I said, stress is, being a woman on the ice of, and this was university level hockey game. And I disallowed a goal in a final, which was tied, and because some guy was fully standing in the crease, and I had to be escorted out of the arena. And I think as what pushed me towards even an entrepreneurial journey was moments such as that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got told in a hockey game, like, to go back to the kitchen. And I thought that, so after spending 10 years with Digital Equipment, which was a phenomenal company, traveled the world, learned lots. They were selling off some technology, and got involved with a group from Montreal to buy some of that technology to do a first startup. Learned a lot through that process. And I think that, most importantly, was that ability to want to take ownership of something. And I think the second is really about financial independence. I think as a salaried employee, which is great, you can save, but the entrepreneurial journey gives you a lot of freedom to look at a really big picture. And a lot of women, I had a great conversation with a founder the other day who's, working specifically on creating programs on managing women's wealth. We're far more conservative. The gap that comes over, 25 years of our working career versus men and how their investments are managed. And I think it was really pushing that gap to look to say, and you have to take risk, right? In order to get financial return. So for me, that was a big motivator is, what risks I could take, and was I willing to lay it on the ground in order to, take 2 to 3 steps forward from a financial perspective.
That's so interesting. And you mentioned that some women that influenced. Who would be your biggest influencer?
Well, I always say, who would I want to sit down to dinner with? I look at, Madeleine Albright. I look at Hillary Clinton. I look at women who have broken down barriers. I think there are so many. I don't think I have one in particular. Even I kind of look at Julie Payette, right? She's still a hero for me. I mean, the fact that she got ousted from government because she called a spade, right? Like, I don't think she was used to working in a government environment. And I think one thing I grew up with, and I don't forgive my language, but early in my career, somebody hung up in a few of the women's offices, right? A man is ambitious, woman is aggressive, right? Like that whole double standard of how a woman's personality is interpreted. And even I find when we interview portfolio companies and that ability to say, somebody, one of the gentlemen will say, "Oh, I found her tone a bit aggressive." I would never hear that in if we were interviewing a team of men. So it really is this kind of initial perception of that, a woman who's more forthright is, I'm not going to say the B word, but that's often what comes up, right? Forgive my candidness, but it's I think that is a real challenge. So I look at women who have been exceptionally successful that have had to really be commanding without being deemed aggressive, and that is such a beautiful, subtle art.
And I think that's one thing I'd like to do, and I'd like to start with today in these panels of creating that B word should not be in existence. To be referred to as an animal should just not happen. If we can take that out of our vernacular, it would be such a grounding place to start.
Yeah, just to add to that, someone is emotional, maybe to change the connotation of this word, because that is a valid word for an animal, but emotional, like I'm being informative, I'm making a point, I'm being demonstrative. Why is that emotional all of a sudden?
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's a double standard on how women are viewed and how men are viewed, and especially when we are a little bit more mature, we tend to, when we have the experience and the knowledge to be able to back up confronting a certain element, then all of a sudden we have this different view. Welcome, Svetlana. We have Svetlana here, and we also have Jacqueline here. Hello, Svetlana.
Hello.
And thank you for joining. Technology is fun, isn't it?
It's amazing. And you know what? I don't know why my video is now not on. I was not able to get on, and I see that my video, you guys don't see me, right?
We don't, but we can hear you just fine. So why don't we just get into the introductions right away? This is Svetlana Elgart, and she is the founder and CEO of Rainbow Chef Academy. Just a quick little introduction.
Rainbow Chef, good morning, everybody. My pleasure to be here and to meet all of you guys. Super excited, even thought for the last few minutes, I'm just trying to get on. Rainbow Chef's Academy. Health, wellness, and nutrition education to help set off diabetes and obesity in our society and our children K through 12 as a whole in the world.
Thank you, Svetlana. I just wanted to add that it's 6 o'clock in the morning for Svetlana as well. So I'll just catch you up on a few of the questions while Jacqueline gets set up. But what's the reason that you started your entrepreneurial journey? Let's go right back to the very beginning.
I just really wanted to change the world and make it a better place for our children and our society with less diseases. As a mom of 3 children, I've noticed how much diabetes and obesity we have in our world, with starting kids as young as 6 and 7 years old. So I thought that I wanted to change the world, and kind of that was my decision to start Rainbow Chefs.
Wonderful. And who is your biggest supporter or your biggest influence? Who is?
When I started, my father was still alive, so it was my dad and my husband were the big believers that I should give it a try. So 8 or 9 years ago, health, wellness, and nutrition education in children was looked at kind of iffy still. So my dad is not anymore with me, but he was my biggest supporter, and my husband remains. So those are the two.
And I think just with Elizabeth's story and your story now that, I'd love to be able to read a study or do a study to see how many founders, how many people started in the ecosystem, one, to change the world, two, to change their world, and three, because they needed to take a stand on their own life. It would be interesting. And that is one thing that I'm going to kind of follow up. Jacqueline, I see that you're joining us by phone. Welcome. And if you are talking, you are on mute.
Okay, am I off?
You are off mute. Welcome. So we have Jacqueline here, and she is the Chief Knowledge Officer from PeopleWell. Welcome, Jacqueline. Again,
Hi.
technology is our friend. You are not the only panelist today that had technology problems. So if you can just give us a quick
beginning.
If you can just give us a quick introduction to yourself, that would be wonderful.
Well, I'm Jacqueline, and I have, I guess my degrees are in psych and sociology and in education. So I have a pretty big background of people skills, and I believe knowledge is the key to moving forward. And I work with PeopleWell. My husband and I founded it. We've rebranded recently. It's been a journey, started as a health spending account company. Then we went to payroll. Then we can do a little bit of everything. And so anything to do with payrolls but lifestyle planning, any of that, we're working on.
That's wonderful. And can you tell us what was your biggest motivation? Who was your biggest supporter when you first started your entrepreneurial journey?
I think it was my husband, Murray, although I was influenced highly by my parents that didn't necessarily always have full-time jobs that had pensions and all of that. Certainly my mom didn't. And I always thought it was unfair that part-time workers or people at home could not get any kind of benefits. I always thought that was incredibly unfair. And so I would always go to my husband, why? Why doesn't this happen? Why doesn't that happen? I don't understand. And he kind of is one of those doers and takes the bull by the horns and said, you're right, why can't we do that? And so we started on our journey.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm going to go back to Elizabeth. When was the first time that you can recollect or remember gender being considered in a business decision?
I'm going to tell a story that had a lot of impact for me when working for another large corporation. So during a recession, significant budget cuts. And the very first thing that got cut was temp budget. So replacement for employees that were out. Main employees that were out were women on maternity leave. So if you had women in your team, you weren't able to replace them during their mat leave. The reality of the situation is, next time around, you didn't hire women on your team because at the end of the day, corporation didn't care what your reason was for not accomplishing your goals. It wasn't like, oh, I had 2 women out on mat leave and I couldn't replace them. At the end of the day, everything is about delivering results. And so I think, from a corporation side, I'm still always, the fact that the government only pays 50% mat leave right off the bat says that we as citizens do not care about women to say that we are willing to cover 100% of their salary while they're out. So we start in the gate being 50% more expensive from an employee side. So we have to work that much harder in order to sometimes put our value on the table. So for me, that was a real wake-up call. And and it's hard, and especially if you're in process manufacturing or any kind of process where you step out for 6 months and then you step back in, and it's really hard to step back in at that same spot because you've been out of the flow. And so, it is. I mean, we have a societal responsibility in order to, continue and have children, and that we should not expect corporations to be the ones that are responsible for equality of women. This is a societal issue, and we as Canadian voters need to get involved and impact that. There are other countries in the world. Actually, Canada ranks about 20th in terms of support of diversity from a funding side, which is just straight pay scale.
Yeah, and I recently and I shared it on the our landing page for the conference about a wonderful lady, Hella Thomas daughter, I think is her last name, that ran for president of Iceland and ended up coming in second. And Iceland has a wonderful and empowering story about the day in 1975, I think it was, that all the women walked out. And it very quickly understood, they very quickly understood the true power of the women, because society does not function without women at the table. And the sooner that we realize that and that we're able to showcase that, I think the more proactively and productively we will move forward. Svetlana, from your side, where was the first time that you noticed gender bias in a business decision?
I think, for me personally, I kind of started to notice it when I started doing fundraising for Rainbow Chefs. I just started, to kind of, pitch and go to different places, to different, meetings. And I started to notice, I guess, the way you're perceived. Is when I first started to think about that there is definitely that going on. For me personally, I've always been very entrepreneurial. So I worked, at the very young age, I worked for Blue Shield of California. And when I left that job, because I could not hold it down anymore, because I had two babies, I had one after another. I had to leave, my job, because I just wasn't, my time in and out with them being one after each other was difficult. And I think I was too young, you guys, and didn't understand it then. So I'm going to say that it was probably back then, even thought I didn't think about it that way, didn't notice it. But to me, in this part of my life, kind of, when I started to do the pitching, I kind of noticed it more and realized what it was when I think back about it. That's probably why I left my first corporate job, is because I wasn't able to, I did a great job, but, being a mom was difficult. And I think that, that kind of led me into quitting. So.
And I think that's really interesting. There was a study done, I believe, by her name is Jackie Kennedy. It was either by her or presented by her, where she talked about the bias in the way questions are asked, regardless of whether it's a female investor or a male investor, to female founders, in that female founders were asked questions that were preventative, whereas male founders were asked questions that were promotional. And anybody who's been on the hot seat in front of an investor, I've been there a number of times myself. I do definitely see that bias. And it's not for us to go, especially when you're in the stress of doing a pitch, to go through and change that. But there was some wonderful coaching tips that she had given to be able to change that preventional question into a promotional. So when you're asked about, this is a saturated market and you have all of these competitors, how do you plan on tackling or getting into this market? And you go, oh, are you asking about my go-to-market strategy? That wonderful switch of the narrative. So all of a sudden you show that you're in control, that you know your stuff, and all of a sudden you're presenting that wonderful promotional, just kind of edging on used car salesman, because you almost want to get there, but but you don't want to quite get there in promoting your confidence and your company. Jacqueline, how about you? When was the first time that you noticed gender bias in a business decision?
Oh gosh, I think for me, it's always been in there as certainly as long as we've owned the business, because way back when I was in my 20s, a couple of things really influenced me, and that was partly why in sociology I took a lot of women's studies courses. I noticed that even working part-time, that all the managers and all the top, if you're working in a store or anywhere of the big chains, they were all men, always men. You're right, women were always let go first. Then I got into education, and coming out of education, I hit right at a time when the recession had hit, and all of the women that took the same course as the men did not find jobs, but all the males did. And partly it was because they want more male role models in education. And so that was so incredibly frustrating. And one little incident really stuck in my mind that made me a little bit more independent was I had a lady come in. I worked at a store at a time. I was only part-time, really young, and went to put her sale through, and her credit card wouldn't work. And she burst into tears because her husband had passed away and everything was frozen. And she couldn't even buy anything for her family. She couldn't get into bank accounts or anything. And I thought, oh boy, you need to have separate from your husband, because should any emergency happen, you've got to have funds of your own and that sort of thing. So that's what influenced me so much. And we've really, really tried in our business. I suspect, I was trying to think over the years, I think we've had certainly more women probably work for us than men, but just not on purpose, just that's the way it worked out.
I love the diversity of the stories that were shared on that. They were such completely different perspectives. And I wonder, do we all consider the same lens when we think of what gender diversity is? Do you think that definition is the same for each of us on these panelists today? I'll start with you, Elizabeth. I know that that's a very loaded question, but do we feel, from your perspective, what does your gender data lens look like?
It got significantly changed. And so I was really fortunate. Status of Women Canada funded a project, and I was nominated as one of the women leaders to participate. So we were 100 women across Canada. We met 5 times over the course of 2 years in order to be able to look, and this was about proposing specific legislative actions that would impact gender diversity. So I was part of a group that was looking at more specifically women in STEM, because it is a challenge. Although we're graduating more women in STEM, we lose them within the first 10 years just due to hostile work environments. And so it has a significant impact to our GDP, that we're forecasting 5 to 7 years out, that we're going to be missing 250,000 people in technology. So something needed to be addressed. But when we came together as these 100 women, what I realized was, oh my God, we broke it up in really 4 levels. One was basic survivability of women. And if we look across Canada, whether it's, the murder of Indigenous women, domestic violence. And so, what is the legislation? I mean, you can get, what's that called? When somebody, a restraining order, but that doesn't necessarily protect them. The amount of women that are, hurt through domestic violence. The second level was basic employability, right? Like in I'm going to say less educated jobs, it's still 50 cents to a man's dollar. I mean, as we move up in terms of university level education, we're still at 70 to 75 cents of a man's dollar. And the third element was really the ability of supporting women getting back into the workforce and more equality. And this was, really more around the trades industry also, and, construction workers. And of course, then, we were considered the fourth echelon. And I can tell you, when I listened to a lot of what was happening, just a basic survivability of women, I thought, oh my God, we have so much more of a fundamental problem to solve than what we're talking about today, which is, at a level where we are employed, we're facing gender gaps and challenges, but I'm not challenged on my basic survival. And I think that was really a change of the focus of my lens on it's got to start at ground zero.
And that's what a powerful statement, like challenged at that ground level. And I'm really hoping that through the series of panels that we have, that we are challenged to actually build in actionable change to every aspect of our of how we start our businesses and how we move through and navigate and grow those businesses. Because honestly, it is at this foundational level when companies are being formed that we can affect the greatest level of change. And I'll tell you, we spoke to, I guess, 30 companies over the last month and a half. And whether they were founded by a male or a female, it didn't matter. To be able to put that gender lens in place and say, have you addressed women in how you've built out your company, your product, your service? And just adding that little tiny bit in, understanding that 50% of any market is not considered niche. So when you apply that same perspective to the human population, 51% of the human population should not be considered niche. So again, the influence starts right at this very basic level of just mentioning, gender, being gender informed. Svetlana, for you to, with your perspective of the gender data gap and taking into account all of the aspects that we have as part of this lens for today, how do you think that differs from other people? Your understanding of gender data gap.
I think we're all in agreement that there is one, and it is really, there is just so much to account for. As you mentioned, the cultures, the industry, where you're living and how your journey is as far as, education and work is concerned. For me personally, I think just because what I'm going through, I've known, in the last 10 years, as I mentioned, and I don't really understand why that is. If it's just more, if it has become, if people are speaking more freely about it, and people are actually understanding and noticing it and maybe doing something about it. Like I said before, I just didn't realize that that's what it was. But I think now people are understanding that there is that issue, and there is a lot of people that I think are noticing it and trying to do something about it in whatever way. It depends, I guess, if it's a company or if it's an entrepreneur. And I definitely think there is a gender gap in the entrepreneurial world. That is just something that I, have been noticing since the very beginning. In many different aspects, but for me personally, that's where, for the last 10 years is what I've been noticing for me.
Thank you, Svetlana. And Jacqueline, do you think that our definition, that we would be in agreement on our definition of the gender data gap?
I think on certain aspects of it, I agree with Elizabeth. It starts at the very, very beginning. And we have to really start either mentoring our girls or at least making the young girls aware of that, frankly, this is incredibly unfair. I've noticed in recent years, and I've commented on it several times, less and less women are in politics, certainly in positions of power. We don't have anyone that's the head of a province, or there's not even that many in the U.S. We've lost a lot of women out of politics, and I think that's just because they're treated so differently. And I think we're still not valued. Women work around their children, about looking after their parents, and you have to take that into account. And I have an elderly mom, and so often I've talked to her caregivers, and a lot of them are just, well, we can't take certain shifts because we have to be home for the kids at that time, that sort of thing. Where I personally noticed it, and of course I noticed it very, very early, is in the medical field. I, unfortunately, when it said in the book about the endometriosis, I was one of those women. I fought, I struggled. I finally got to the States where a gentleman was doing research because his wife suffered from it. That was the only reason he set up his clinic. So that was an incredibly difficult journey. On top of that, I have incredibly bad migraines, which not so much today, but again, back when I was younger, I've had them since a child, which was never recognized. And then it was a women's problem. And so all the medications you were put on were kind of, oh, well, we just happened to notice this worked for a migraine. It's taken 30 years since the last major breakthrough in migraine medications has come through. And so that I find shocking. And a lot of it is just sort of this attitude that these are women's issues, so it doesn't pay quite as much to fix them, or it's harder, or I'm not sure what the reason is, but it has been a fight, I'll tell you that.
Indeed, it has. And just for the audience, the book that we're referring to is Invisible Woman, Data Bias in the World Designed for Men, Caroline Criado Perez. And we'll make sure that we share that in the notes afterwards. And Jacqueline, just because you kind of set the ground for the next question, understanding that our lens for this panel right now is age diversity. What is the next step that we can do to create or lower the boundaries to women entering into, I'm not even going to say enter into the startup ecosystem, but let's just say in general, what is the next big step that we can do to support women and to lower the gender data gap?
I think one of the things is that women need to use we're more people oriented quite often, and more caring oriented, in that we feel it's our responsibility to care for children, care for elderly, that sort of thing. And I think we can use that to start mentoring younger women. Part of it is making the younger women aware right away that this is happening. Have them reach out for funding, have them reach out. Maybe other women have to actually offer to support them in various ways, monetarily. But I think a lot of it is mentoring. We get lost in the male hierarchy so much that I don't know how to put it, but I just feel like we're always floundering because we think we need to be like men and work twice as hard to prove that we're like men. And I think we need to stop that. We need to accept we have our own strengths and be confident with those strengths.
I think that's really powerful. And I'm going to recommend another book by Sarah Lacey. I am just in the final chapter of it, and it's called The Uterus is a Feature, Not a Bug, which does talk a little bit about what you just mentioned, Jacqueline. So I would encourage everybody to take a read. And you kind of merged on to another question as well, is what group or who should we recruit to make this change? And you mentioned young women as well. So I'm going to propose both those questions to you, Elizabeth, and that is, what's the next big step, and who should we be recruiting to create that change?
That's it. I still go back to, it is a societal issue, not necessarily a corporate issue. I think my favorite one is Siri's a woman, Alexa's a woman. It is all of, subservience message that is going out today. I still laugh that, the smartest computer in the world from IBM, Deep Blue is a man, right? We're through the things that we use every day consistently making that statement. And yet, what are we doing about it, right? We talk about gender diversity in terms of, and I came out of a development environment. I've been, looking in the games industry, everything else, like, it's a 90% male dominated, and personality makes it into code. And it's not a negative thing, right? I'm not criticizing men for this, but it is why diversity is important in the, as I said, Fitbit was another one, right? Health issues, never even took into consideration any women's health issues. And part of that was just the lens of the development. And so I think that, if you're expecting corporations, at the end of the day, corporations are not humans, right? They're entities, and their purpose is to make profit. And we as shareholders, enjoy that profit. So, you want to be an activist shareholder, then get involved. Anybody who's a shareholder gets the opportunity to vote in all corporations, right? So make your voice heard. Sometimes I get lazy, right? I toss mine, I get them in the mail, and I'm like, I got no time for this. I'm just one voice, but that voice carries weight. My dream actually, when my spare time comes up, is to make an application that we can band together as individual voters in order to have weight in terms of shareholder meetings, right? To do this in electronic distribution form. But, that is where it starts. At a higher level in terms of the mentorship and everything else, it's important. And I think women, need to be brave and take brave steps. I highly recommend a video which also changed my perspective, and it's called A Man's Brain versus a Woman's Brain. And it is one of the most insightful aspects about why our synapses are different. And, part of it is, men from another favorite book, The Naked Ape, right, which talks about our biological history. Men were focused on going out to hunt, right? So all they spent focused on one thing: kill that animal, bring it home. Women had to, be multitaskers from day one in terms of taking care of the kids, prepping the food, keeping the cave warm. All of these things have, stayed with us in evolution. And so, learning to embrace our genetics, right? And so I think this video, I played it with teams, and I love how everybody suddenly starts to talk about, right? Oh my God, they'd say, yes, I have a nothing box. I can go someplace and think about nothing. And a woman is like, inconceivable to me. And so when you look at those differences, and then you start to talk to them and say, okay, how does this change how you handle in a day? So to me, that has always been, accepting our differences and learning how to work as teams to embrace them. A woman shouldn't have to change her pitch because of perception. She should be able to take that perception into play in that discussion and say, I bet you're all thinking, I'm of child age. Well, let me tell you, I've had 3 kids so far and managed to run a sustainable business. Just put it out on the table, talk about it, because that perception is real.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. Again, this is something that that I read about in Sarah Lacey's book. This uterus is a feature, not a bug, as well. And I love that it's a very empowering statement that you said there. That even though we don't take a step back, don't worry that you're just one voice, because your one voice carries weight. And Elizabeth, I appreciate that statement. Svetlana, from your perspective, who should be recruited to make this change faster?
I think this change has to come from society as a whole. I think that I liked everybody's answer, and I completely agree in all respects. I think mentoring young women is extremely important. I mean, I have 3 daughters myself, so let me tell you, for the past 33 years, I've been doing that. And I think it's extremely important. But I think it's important that we get some kind of, I'm big thinker and a big solver. I always think globally. And I think there should be something universal in place for companies, when they do hiring and policies. I mean, I think there should be something in place that would help to avoid this gender gap. And I don't think we have it as of yet. I mean, I think we have bits and pieces, and some companies do, some companies don't. But I personally would love to see, something in place that would be universal to, something that would work for small company, big company, that could be put in place to help avoid that. So that's just my view on it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into, or just to add a little bit of extra information on what Elizabeth had mentioned about about history. And the bias goes back a very long way, even back to hunter and gatherer, in that the stereotypes were defined and women were actually left out of history. So even though we have had women warriors in the past, those are the stories that were not told. So the stereotype has been built up even in our history lectures and lessons. So I'd like to perhaps add as a little extra that perhaps we should be changing how we teach in the classroom, and not just girls, but young girls and young men, young boys, how to take a look and decrease that bias at that very foundational level. And I think that's where everything needs to start, is from foundation, whether it's a foundation of a startup being influenced, whether it's from a startup of a child being educated to create and lower those boundaries. So on that, what should actionable change look like? So from my perspective, it's changing the textbooks, right? Changing how, and we're in this environment where we can do it. From the startup level, it's about having those conversations with founders at that very malleable, foundational part of their company, so that they can address both how their service and product will be used by men and women. So what does actionable change look like? And how should we then, what metrics should we put to that? What objectives and key results, and what return on investment? And if we could take a look at that, perhaps from the lens of age diverse founders, and what role we can have with that actionable change. Elizabeth, we'll start with you.
It's funny because we moved to age diverse, which is, I think, not necessarily focused on the difference in terms of gender, right? Like that's a whole other issue, which it's a whale of an issue, right? And especially I could say as, OLD is a 4-letter word for me. It doesn't exist. I looked last night and I was having a dinner event with my mom and my sister and some friends from Sweden. And, my mom's 92, right? And on the whole, like I still say, can't have an intelligent conversation without Google, and she sits at the table and we ask her for facts and everything. My mom's super techie. And, I look at, this perception of age and contributions. And my joke with her is, recently there was a 97-year-old who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And I keep saying, my mom, you still got time, right? 6 more years, you can do it. You can get your Nobel Prize. And I look at William Shatner, right? Same age as my mom, 91, right? He grew up in Montreal. And, he just went up to space, like for real, right? And I think that there is an incredible challenge, even harder on women as we add years to our birth date. And to me, there's a tremendous opportunity happening, because there is a change in terms of changing of the guard, right? There is a lot of people moving into retirement, and a lot of people, making their careers also at that age. I do get upset when I see all these young founder programs. I'm like, oh my God, why are we not looking at founders over 50 who, have moved out of corporate life, want to get into early stage technology or whatever element in terms of entrepreneurial journey. And that reorchestration of workforce, right? 60 is not a retirement age anymore. I got a comment one time in a presentation on saying, well, I'm glad they were, quite frank. I think you're too old. I was like, what? I said, would you say that to Warren Buffett? Honestly, right? Like, so I think there's, that change of perception, right? And I don't think anybody says Warren Buffett, or Charlie Munger should be changed out, at 92 and 90, I think are both their ages, right? So yeah, there's a lot to be done. I don't know if I answered your question, Cindy. It kind of threw me for a loop and getting
That's okay.
age diversity. So.
No, and I think that it needed to be. I'm actually turning 50 this year, and I'm so proud of it because to me, growing up, that age always marked the ideal age to be a CEO because it was packed with knowledge and packed with influence. So, in terms of actionable change, that's what I will be doing and changing from that perspective. I'll tell you as a couple of metrics from my standpoint for Svetlana and Jacqueline, I'm using this conference as or the summit of 14 panels as my aha moment, and my actionable change then is having developed a valuation methodology that builds gender informity, being gender informed into the value of a company. So those are some elements, and the rate of return. Well, let's just tell you that the number of companies that we are influencing to look at things differently will be one of our key metrics that we're looking at. So Svetlana, from your perspective, what is the solid actionable change that we can leave this panel from, and what might a KPI or a key objective or key result or a return on investment look like from your perspective?
Well, again, I guess I'm going to go, because if you want, key return and ROI, there has to be things put in place. I don't think there is a lot of things that are a lot of policies and a lot of information as from what I see today that is put in place. My oldest daughter is an attorney. She's a corporate attorney, and she has been promoted to be now a general counsel for a company. And we often talk about this, just so y'all know. I tell her that, that's just an empty area that needs to really be done and be done right. So I think that, measurable differences comes from change, and change has to start somewhere. I do agree with, with what Cindy said and Elizabeth, and then I do agree that there needs to be changes that are put in place in the early years. But it's to me, that's a hard one to imagine exactly how to do that, and what age do you start to kind of, talk to your child and give them that information. But I certainly, I think as a society, if we have things in place that can, hold companies and entrepreneurs and everybody who's hiring someone to work for them accountable, and it's a now with technology could be a very simplistic system, then I think that will drive the change and awareness. I think that that's what's missing, and that's what needs to happen, and that's what we don't have as a whole as of yet. So that's my feeling. If we can, develop something that would be a master sheet. I mean, we have other things in place, so I think this just is something that needs to happen. And then you get your ROI and all of the things that you're looking for. But that's just my vision on
I
on
appreciate
this
that,
subject.
Svetlana. That's actually really, and I think that's moving away a little bit from the quotas and maybe into something that's more actionable, might be very grounding. And then I'm just going to ask one question to Jacqueline, and then leave the last question with Elizabeth, so that we make sure we capture the last 5 minutes very well. But Jacqueline, has this conversation then, in this lens, galvanized your thinking around gender, around the gender data gap, or has it just gotten you started?
For me, it's been a lifetime of seeing it and struggling with it, and a couple of things I do have that I think women have to galvanize behind is, and there obviously needs to be rules, is, politics is so male dominated, and the powerful men, whether it's in the US or in Canada, don't always vote a woman's way, or even look through a women's lens. And I think we have to hold media and people accountable when they put women down for, if they're running for politics, what does it matter what she's wearing? Listen to what she's saying. We don't comment on the male. So that's part of it. And to the side of, I believe we all educate our kids, in certain ways. My son always argued from the sides of women's right in school. It was so funny. But I think we're trying to put together, and part of the reason I'm in the knowledge side is I truly believe knowledge is power. And so women need to also have the same knowledge as men and readily available, and it needs to be non-exploitive. The minute you're selling something with that knowledge, it takes away its power. And I think women tend to get sold a bill of goods often because they're trying to do the right thing, but maybe don't look at it with, or don't have the time to look at it with as critical of an eye. So I think we have to start with giving people knowledge, and whether that's right from school age, I agree. We need to be teaching our children critical thinking skills, because although we have all the information in the world through technology, it's only through critical thinking that you get knowledge, and knowledge is what's going to change. You have to understand what you need to save for, what types of insurance you need, what do your taxes go to, your deductions on your paycheck. When you start understanding all those things, then you have more power, and you can confidently run for office, or you can confidently do this or that. But I think media tends to be entertainment now, and I think that's sad, because I don't think we have any place we can go that gives us facts. And yes, I guess facts can be different to different people, but not in the way that they're being blown out of proportion at the moment.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, just quick 1 minute. Who do you think is doing it right now?
I mean, corporations have a lot of initiatives to look and put numbers in place, quotas in place. I'm not 100% sure that quotas are the right way to do it. I do get upset when I see press releases, woman named to board. I'm like, I don't care if she's a woman. Tell me what her history is, her contribution, why she's going to make such a great board member. I'm hard pressed to say who's doing it right, because we're seeing very gradual changes. I mean, I look at countries that are doing it right. Whether that's Sweden, whether that's Iceland, I mean, equal pay, equal work, equal status. I think that we're making improvements in terms of even forcing, both parents to take maternity leave, so that it's equally distributed in terms of time out from work, in terms of, and I think, as more and more that comes, I can tell you that the change to only covering 50% from a government funding side for mat leave is probably going to get addressed much more quicker. So I see progress there.
Wonderful. And I'd like to thank all of our guests today. Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Teresa, for standing in at the very beginning. We all go forward and keep running and waving. I will tell that story at another point. Thank you very much. And let's change how startups start.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.